The little bar popped. I pushed the wrong button. All right. We'll attach these. Anyways, I'll be right back. I'm going to go grab two plein air paintings from yesterday just to show you that if you want vibrancy, it might be better to start with vibrant colors versus the grays that I've been starting with. So I'll be right back.
That makes sense.
Mhm. Yes, and the soft edges, if we could see the horizon line, I just went to that immediately. It's so beautiful how it just fades right in the sky and the water just fades right into each other. And
I agree. That was the horizon is gorgeous.
yeah,
He's just too darn talented.
he
How
is.
I want to know how he mixed phthalo green into that beautiful blue water.
Well, the phthalo green is not like dioxazine purple or Prussian blue. Dioxazine purple or Prussian blue are really sometimes hard to handle, but I haven't had any problems with mixing the phthalo green and the red. And like he said, to mix a little more phthalo or a little more red to get it warmer or cooler. And that's how I get, and then you add white to it, and it's, you know, and you get all your levels of grays and purples. You can make purple with that. It's gorgeous.
Beautiful purples. Yeah. Beautiful grayed down purples.
Yes,
That's really pretty.
that's gorgeous.
Beautiful
But
painting
yeah,
too.
you can see how, I mean, I didn't work on this area at all. That's just kind of blocked in. And we were standing literally in a clover field, but it just wasn't blooming. It was just starting.
Right.
Where is that?
Cornelius?
Is it kind of like on Highway 219?
Not far, like
Or
5
47?
minutes from 219. So anyways, yesterday was everything. It was 40 degrees when we started, and it rained, and it was super, it would be sunny. But what I really liked is the rain kind of obliterating the back hills. But anyways, I started this with that transparent earth red and ultramarine blue, and I just never got out of it. Like, I'll let it dry, and then I'll be able to, you know, bring in colors. But what I did find is all the colors were sinking in and picking up some of that kind of dirtiness, or, you know, but it does kind of work for being a moody piece.
It really makes that foreground, the clover look. I think it's nice. I think it's a nice contrast with the sort of more vibrant in the front.
Yeah, thank you. And I almost didn't put the clover in because I thought that it would really fight against the cool grays and the darkness of it. But I'm glad I did. So I did that one, and then the first one we did was a 30-minute challenge, and I also challenged myself to do it in 30 brush strokes. So 30 minutes, 30 brush strokes. And I decided to do just almost a sky study.
Wow.
That's gorgeous. I
Beautiful.
love
Is it
studying.
just using 30 strokes?
Yeah, probably maybe a little more to get some of these little dashes where I wanted to, you know, but roughly, I mean, I had it completely covered in 4.
Nice,
So
gorgeous.
then I was able to use
Very nice.
lights, and let's see if
It's
I
so
can.
pretty.
Yeah, so now you can see a little more detail in the clouds.
Wow.
But the clouds were beautiful. Let me see if I can get rid of that glare too. But
So this was plein air, so you did
it's
not.
always interesting. Like, I've kind of stopped worrying so much about making a beautiful, beautiful plein air painting, and more about challenges or just different ideas I want to work on.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges I'm giving myself is to have texture. So you can see in the clouds, I actually played up the texture, just saying, yeah, the special area is the sky. You know, the ground was just kind of put in as a supporting cast.
The sky is beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, it was
It's beautiful.
I mean, the clouds were moving so quickly. So it was interesting to kind of just, you know, oh, that part's boring. Wait 5 minutes. Oh, here's something. Okay, that's interesting. You know, these shapes. So anyways, that was yesterday's plein air class.
So since it was plein air, you did not do the mixing of the values, right? Like you were talking about with the ocean painting?
I'm not positive I understand completely.
You were talking about doing the underpainting? I think it was the underpainting, maybe
Oh,
not.
in the first one I did it underpainting. In this one, I just did like the 30 strokes. So I started it off with a great big brush. So all of the green was one brush stroke, all of this was one brush stroke, and then all of the darks of the sky was one brush stroke. And then I came back in with some lights. So that was my fourth brush stroke. So I was kind of like just, and you know, it was as sloppy as you would imagine. It was just kind of big areas. And then I was able to just really quickly take another brush, you know, and bring in these areas down below. And so, yeah, there's a couple dabs. So I stopped counting towards the end where I just kind of thought, you can see that it has implied detail, right? Like there's a lot of little breaks that kind of read as like a field going behind some trees, I hope, kind of disappearing, reappearing, disappearing, reappearing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that would have been hard to do, really being conscious. But like with the lights of the skies, I was able to do a lot of that by really just making a big pile of a slightly yellowish white and really dragging it from the top where it's really bright and really thick. And as it came down, it just picked up a little more paint, you know, got a little more contaminated, a little bit darker. And all of a sudden, you know, so it just kind of read properly, in my opinion, where the brightest parts of the clouds were towards the top, and then it gets dimmer and dimmer as it gets towards the horizon. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if a 30 stroke challenge is like a really useful tool, but it's a fun tool to learn economy and to learn just different brush strokes and to actually load your brush up with paint. And, you know, and then really what it helps me the most with is to make sure I load my brush up so I can get some texture, but it also load it up and then really focusing on my pressure of the brush, you know, where I want more paint, where I want less paint. And if I load a big brush with a lot of paint, then I can turn it on its side. I can push it down. I can lift it up, you know, as long as it's touching the canvas, I count it as one stroke. And it was kind of amazing. And you can see how I connected it. So, right. Are you guys seeing my mouse, my cursor?
No.
No.
Okay. So we're going to start at the top middle with the clouds. So I started up there, obviously, and just kind of dumped some paint and kind of, and then you can see how I kept everything connected. I'd kind of come over here, come back across. I'm thinking to the right, and then all of a sudden down below, up to the left. You see how the lights are all connected?
Yeah.
But if you squint your eyes at it, it doesn't look like they're connected. So I'm pushing down, I'm pulling up, I'm letting it barely skim. And it really is teaching me a lot about the variability of a single brush stroke with just pressure, angle, loading up paint, like I said. So it's been a good exercise for me, as far as, you know, moving forward with having more texture and more paint. But you know, we're all going to be at different levels and aspiring towards different things in our paintings. But anyways.
Michael, on that one part you referred to, the sort of the field in the background with the trees kind of interrupting it. What did you do, the contiguous brush stroke with the dark trees to kind of go up and down over that light color?
No, the light color came in last.
Oh, so were those different brush strokes?
Yeah, so that's where it got, you know, beyond 30 probably, if I went and counted all the little dabs of paint. But I started off with that challenge, and I told them, I was telling the students that it's just a challenge. Just how far can I get in 30 brush strokes? But okay, the painting could use a little more, right? A little more, again, implied detail, right? You see in the middle of the purple hills in the background and how it has that pale green back there. Does that read like a field kind of going across?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's just implied detail, right? That's just one, you know, not one brush stroke, but, you know, just barely any information there. And by picking it up and, you know, leaving it. So, yeah, I bet you there's probably 40 or 50 brush strokes in this painting, truly. But just starting with that challenge of how far can I get, I was able to do this painting in between 20 and 30 minutes.
Wow.
It's amazing. I love the sky is just
Yeah.
absolutely amazing. And are those bales of hay in the field? Or houses?
No, they're meant to be barns. There's
Oh.
no hay being baled yet. Yeah, so yeah, I didn't worry too much. I just tried to imply some structures and different ideas of, I don't know, again, implied detail. So great. Let's jump over to our Padlet, which I guess I gotta pull up still real quick. Give me 1 second. And let's just quickly walk through the handout. And I'm not going to be able to see you guys for this part of it, because I've got references to show as we're going through this. Everybody sees our Padlet page?
No.
No.
Oh, okay. I have to do it again. Okay, share screen. All right, great. Now you should be able to see it.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so our videos, quick questions. I have not read, doesn't look like there's any new questions on there. Online links, All right, so the 4 layers of water. So this is kind of interesting. This area right here, the 4 layers of water, actually, I came to this kind of surprisingly late, like in the last probably 5 or 6 years, to actually go, oh, there is this. Like, you know, I've always just tried to paint water as it kind of looks. Like, it was reinforced to me when I was learning to paint water, to paint it abstractly, just to go, okay, there's this color, this shape, this value. And I still think that's a very sound way of painting it, is that it's very amorphous. And it's, you know, if you think too scientifically about it, you'll get in your head and you'll start overthinking it. Because I'm a very firm believer in, we don't paint things, we paint values, lights, and colors and edges. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, but that being said, let's figure out what the 4 layers of water are. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and read it down, and then I'll bring up some references as we're talking about it. So exploring the stillness of water, calm waters. Exploring the serenity of still waters, dive into the intricate play of light and shadow upon the calm surface and the study of reflections. All right, so the power, and this is one of my favorite quotes, the power in a work of art depends on the depth of an artist's insight of that object he contemplates. And I don't know, I mean, Emerson was a bit of a scientist, but at the same time, he was very romantic and very much a poet. So, you know, you could think of it like, okay, I've got to really learn and understand water, you know, on a scientific level. But I actually believe that more of what Emerson was doing in his writing and his insights was more about just being there and being present and really witnessing. And so I think I like this quote, I think, because it goes both ways. You know what I mean? It's the scientific, you know, learning, but also just the observational, like, what is it that I'm seeing? What's happening here? All right, so this is the most important part of the whole handout. If you only read to this part, you're fine. 4 layers of water. All right, and I should have underlined it, the bottom, the body, reflections, and top layer. But the bottom of water, rocks and sand, and we could also have plants or, you know, whatever else, whatever is below and on the bottom of the water, right? The body of water, the color of the water itself as it is affected by its surrounding and what lies beneath. All right, so some water is dirty, some water is pristine and clean, right? So you want to be cognizant of that. You want to be aware of, you know, am I painting muddy water? Am I painting, you know, has it rained recently and the stream is brown from all the runoff? Or is it bright, you know, and clear, like I could almost feel like I could drink from it. So be aware of that. All right, reflections is what we worked on the last couple weeks. Reflections on top of the water, trees, sky, or other things that reflect onto the top of the water. All right. And I often thought of that as the top layer, but in fact, the top layer of the water is the moving currents, glints of light, ripples, and splashes. And oftentimes, what I actually will look for on top of the water is, are there any lily pads or leaves floating or anything, you know, a boat, anything like that too, that kind of just helps to separate that space out a little more. We have this really nice painting here by Frank Weston that is talking about the top of the water, right? It's got the lily pads floating on it. He doesn't hint to the depth or anything. So this one would just be top of water and reflections. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay. When we look at this also, you know, this is a photo, but, you know, also with the lily pads, do you guys see how, and the reason I chose to do it this method is because I can zoom in. So we have the lily pads, we have the reflections, but we also have these koi, these fish. This guy is so aggressive, he's, you know, causing ripples, his head's above the water. But what we also have are the koi under the water. Here's a rock. And we also have what I always like to see when I see lily pads are their stems or whatever they're called for lily pads going under the water. You see how towards the top of the water, it's clearer. And if we follow that, now there's a cast shadow on that stem. It reappears in the light, but it's much dimmer, right? So what does that signify to us, Regini? Why is this dimmer than this?
Because it is way below.
Yes, exactly right. So we can really see it here. As it gets deeper and deeper, the water gets less light, right? You know, you hear about in the ocean that there's a level of, you know, depth of water where there's no light getting in. So being aware of that is really interesting. And you can even see it in the koi. This guy are much closer to the surface. I think that's a guy here underneath. And you can see how kind of obliterated they are, but you can still tell they're fish because they're orange. You know, this guy's a little bit below the surface. So just kind of being aware, like, what's the depth? How much light is getting into that water? How much movement is there in the water, whether it's rapids or, you know, wind or a fish or a duck, whatever it is that's making a little bit of current. If anybody has questions along the way, let me know.
I've noticed sometimes, boy, it really takes a lot of skill to get the koi right in a painting. I've seen really good artists still, the koi looks like they're just stuck to the top of the water.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So let's pull them back up. So what's happening is, you know, it's tighter right here where it's right above, but you can see it already starts to lose his edge as he gets a little deeper, right? This guy's scary to me. But his head is above the water, right? Like his forehead or whatever. And then you can see it dissipating. And
Looks
yeah,
like a
not even
snake.
positive that's a fish. But right, our brain knows that this is a fish. Even if we hadn't seen those other two koi, our brain knows, even though it's very abstract, right? It's very broken up, soft edges, not well described. So just kind of being aware of all these different tools that we have. I'm just noticing there's also transparency back here where you can see in under the water a little bit in here. Oftentimes in the shadows or in the reflections, you'll actually get in the shadowy reflections, I guess I should say, the darker reflections, you can actually see into the water a little better than in the bright reflections of the sky. All right, the duality of water presents a paradox, simultaneously elusive and reflective. Mastery of transparency, movement, and reflection is essential, serving as the foundational elements of its representation. All right, and this is where it gets crazy. Water is also dynamic, echoing the hues and forms of its surroundings. Before working with your canvas or panel, thoroughly analyze the scene, assess the color harmony and the interplay of light upon the water. Who here is already thinking this is way too confusing? I'm not painting water. But it's a lot. But at the same time, you don't have to always think about all these aspects. You can literally just, what do I see? How does it relate to the rest of the image? Foundational underpaintings. Foundational underpainting initiate with a layer of shadow, setting the stage for the eventual emergence of reflections. Harmonize your colors with their complementary counterparts, or embrace gray's versatility. Aim for a desaturated palette. All right. So when we are looking at water, you see how dark these darks are and how light these lights are? And when we look to the reflections, how they both get much closer, the highlights and the shadows are much closer, much grayer than they are up here. See if I got another quick example. All right, so you can see the darks get a little lighter. The highlights get a little darker. Oh, I thought I had a lot more references than this. Interesting. I wonder if I put them in the wrong folder. All right. All right, so here's an interesting one for me. This is a bit of a trick, almost like a hack, if you will, in a way that I paint my reflections quite quickly, oftentimes. Vertical brush strokes, meaning up and down, for evoking the depth and stillness of an undisturbed pool or water. Horizontal strokes for texture. All right, so oftentimes I'll take and mix that color from above, but a little bit, you know, more towards the mid, a little bit more towards the gray. And I'll just drag those colors down unless I'm trying to paint a real mirror-like reflection. And then I will clean the brush and I will do horizontal, meaning from side to side strokes. Maybe I'll load up the brush a little bit with some like lighter color to add like glistening, you know, like it's picking up a little more light. Horizontal strokes for texture, introducing horizontal strokes to represent the subtle undulations of water's surface, capturing its interaction with the elements. I am truly surprised how often I get away with this trick. That I just paint the reflection in verticals, up and downs, and then I will simply drag a couple horizontal strokes across it. And it really feels strangely like a reflection. If you've been a student of mine, you've seen me do it a couple times where all of a sudden I've just got this big dark mass laid in, and then I just drag my brush horizontally side to side across that, and all of a sudden I can literally hear like the sigh of relief from you guys as all of a sudden the painting just feels like it lays down and just begins to work. Edges are gentle and diffused often. Soften the transitions between the lights and the darks to emulate this quality. You can either use a dry brush or you can mix a color that's kind of a combination of the two. There's lots of ways to soften edges. Altering perceptions with the presence of ripples in water, modify the reflections, adjust shapes and lines to create a visual symphony. So that part is just speaking to go back, step back, take a 5-minute, 10-minute, 15-minute break, and then come back and just say, okay, what could I do to make it a little prettier or to read a little bit better? So, all right. Capturing the movement of water. In your brushstrokes is a dynamic process that involves both technique and observation. Here are some tools to help you convey the fluidity and motion of water in your paintings. Observe the water. Spend time watching how water moves. So now we're talking about like creeks and streams and anything that has, even a pond, if it has wind or anything else in it. Spend time watching how water moves. Notice the patterns, speed, and rhythm of the flow. A lot of students over the last couple years have basically asked, like, how do I paint water? Right? There is no trick. There is no answer to that because water is so, varied. There's so many ways to see it. There's so many things it's doing. Again, just thinking back to the 4 levels of the water. So the key is observation. Use loose flowing brushstrokes to mimic the movement of water. Allow your hand to move freely and expressively across the surface. I find like when I'm painting waves or rapids or waterfalls, a lot of time this is really helpful. Or like a beautiful clear day, but there's ripples on the water, like from a little bit of breeze. A lot of times, and again, I'm a big fan of Monet, even though I don't paint like him. I really learn a lot by looking at his work. So I think of the more abstract patterning, just kind of like I showed you with those rocks painting that we started the class with. Color and light, pay attention to how light interacts with the water. Use your brushstrokes to convey the play of light and shadows, focusing on how colors blend and change with the movement. All right, for this, I've got a picture by Kathleen Hudson, right? So she's got the waterfall, she's got the movement, the lights and the shadows. You can see the cool blues, cool grays, cool purples, getting warmer, even though her warm, still gray. But what I actually really liked was this little area right here in this, both on the top and the bottom. I mean, her waterfalls are wonderful, but I really like this little sense of delicate, but still movement in the water. You see that? And you see that up here? So letting the brush do some of that, being brave enough to put down good marks that are interesting, that still, so if we followed this, these brush strokes are mostly sideways. Now they're horizontal, diagonal, 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 horizontal, diagonal, diagonal, and almost like an inverse horizontal, like almost. Right? So we can really let the movement of our brush strokes, think of literally mimicking that movement of the water with your brush.
She leads you through the picture with the sunlight too.
She sure does. Yeah, no, she's so good. Really nice person too.
What's her name?
Kathleen Hudson. Yeah. Color and light. Next one. Pay attention to how light interacts with the water. Use your brushstrokes to convey the play of light and shadow, focusing on how colors blend and change with the movement. Brush variety. All right. So when we're doing, if you're thinking painting the, the movement of water, this will be more fun for those of you who want to paint a little looser, a little more impressionistic, maybe who don't want to paint with as much glazing, maybe want to paint a little more alla prima or directly. So if that's you, you may want to pick a reference with a little more movement. Brush variety. Experiment with different brush sizes and shapes to create a range of textures. Broad, sweeping strokes can suggest more significant movements, while smaller, delicate touches can indicate subtle ripples. Don't be afraid to layer your brush strokes. Overlapping, this is wet into wet here. So overlapping and blending colors and shapes can create a sense of depth and movement. Impressionist inspiration. Study the works of Impressionist painters like Claude Monet, who were masters at capturing the essence of movement in their work. Notice how they used brushstrokes to convey light, emotion, and the fleeting effects of the environment. I thought I had a number of references from Monet to show you, but I must have thrown them into another folder. This one's a little bit similar to the picture I'll be working on. So this is a photo again. So you can see how back here the water's a little stiller, right? It's probably a little deeper, a little slower moving. And then what's happening here is the water is getting shallow and you're getting these ripples from the rocks, a little more movement, right? And if we were to look at this just observationally, it's mind-boggling, right? There's just so much information, so many transitions of lights and darks and colors. But if we just squint our eyes at it and really try to think simple, like what is this? This is whiter, you know, grayer, bluer, slightly greener, oranger. It's a tougher one, gray, and yeah. And so then you come in and then now you can just block in areas and then really using your brush to kind of break those up, or your palette knife may be a good tool here as well. I really like this picture. I've never painted this scene, but I like the abstract nature that the focus is up here, but yet 2/3 of it is just a lead in, just with these beautiful, very impressionistic, right? I mean, look at this. That is just an abstract painting, right?
Yeah.
You tried to break this all down and figure it out, you just drive yourself mad. So all we need to do is get the idea, the feeling. You can see like some of these brush strokes would be at an angle. Some of these brush strokes would be at this angle. You know what I mean? Like up here, they become very horizontal brush strokes. Does that make sense to you guys, showing these different?
It's
Yeah.
Yes.
looks like the water is dancing.
Yeah, really, it almost looks like crumpled up tinfoil.
Hmm. I put up in the reference photo section, I put up a painting by was it Fritz Thalow? I don't know how to pronounce his name, but it's similar. It shows a similar area, and he just is so incredible.
Yeah, we'll definitely check that out
Colors.
here in just a little bit.
Beautiful.
All right, so in plein air, right? I know there's a couple of you that are interested in painting outdoors and trying that. The big thing when you do paint outdoors is just to have fun, just to try things. Do not hold on too tightly, especially in the beginning, to making a perfect, you know, refined image that you're going to frame, because plein air painting is really hard and things are changing. So I prefer now to go out and plein air paint and just try to get ideas, just try to get notes for future paintings, and then be happily surprised when they work out. All right, so in plein air, if possible, paint outdoors to capture the changing effects of light and atmosphere on water. This practice can help you develop a quick approach to painting water. Expressive movement. Your brush's expressive movement is critical. Use streaks of color that blend from the water surface, reflecting the dynamic nature of the subject. So with plein air painting, it's almost equally valuable just to really go out and just sit or stand or whatever and just observe. Really try to understand what it is you're seeing. Not understand scientifically so much, but I mean, you can break it down that way, but then just go, how would I paint this? There's so much time I spend literally seeing things, just going, you know, I don't have my paints with me. I'm just standing there waiting in line or whatever else. And I'm just kind of like, how would I paint this? What are the edges? What are the colors? What are the temperatures? What is the movement? How would I paint it? And I think it's a good exercise that we literally don't have to paint to learn. We can literally think about painting to learn. All right, so here's the tricky part. This is the one I've worked desperately to find good references for and didn't find a whole lot just because of my photo collection. But painting the transparency of water with oil or acrylic paints involves a few essential techniques to capture the essence of water's clarity and movement. Here's a guide. One option is to begin by underpainting the creek bed and surrounding elements that will be visible through the water. Use earth tones and darker colors to establish depth. Build up layers gradually allowing each layer to dry before applying the next. This will enhance the luminosity and create the illusion of water's transparency. Applying thin layers of transparent oil paint or acrylics to create the water's transparent effect. Use a medium like Galkid or Liquin mixed with an excellent transparent color to glaze over the darker areas, giving the impression of depth. All right.
Now,
This
here you could, excuse me, you could
Please.
here you could use the clear, I would use clear gesso, but I forget what you used in between your airbrush medium or something. That you could use between these layers.
Yes. So clear gesso for me it seems very sandy and rough. And I don't know if that's just the batch I have, but there's a lot of interesting texture to it. So yeah, I'm experimenting with, I actually just bought 2 more mediums yesterday. So I'm experimenting with different things, but yeah, the airbrush medium or a matte medium or a gloss medium or a glazing medium, whatever you want to use, you can separate it, but you really don't need to separate it with a transparent layer. But I do find that it's kind of interesting in that painting that I did, where I separated all of them with a transparent layer in between the oil painting that I did of the tree over the cliff. It got an amazing reviews. I think I could have sold that painting numerous times at the show I just had. So that is something I think people are kind of seeing, how the light gets in there to those transparent layers and bounces around in those colors. And again, that's kind of coming from my studies of Maxfield Parrish. All right, so really quickly, this whole section here is about kind of building it up slowly. It's very instinctual for us to think, you know, values and then glazing in, and it's a way I paint a lot. But I am going to urge you to do the next step after that at some point. So reflections, okay. So remember that glazing methods will require multiple painting sessions and time to dry the preceding layers completely. If you're doing oils, completely is really important. There's probably all of us have tried glazing before our painting was all the way dry. Reflections, adding reflections, light and objects on the surface of the water. Use pale colors like that of the sky and lightly apply them in smooth, rippled formations across the surface. Introduce faint ripples to create reflections, clouds, or light. Detailing, use lighter and darker shades of the same color to show the water's movement and the objects beneath the water surface. Adjust the tones to reflect the dynamic nature of the water. I got this part from my conversation with Nyla last Thursday. We were looking at her painting, and we can look at it again, but we're all trying to figure out why it didn't quite read, why the rocks felt closer to the top or above the water, or, you know, they just weren't reading how she intended them to read. So Nyla, this part was for you. Balance the light and shadows, and this part as well. Balance the light and shadows to mimic how light spots shimmer and shadows create mysterious depths. This contrast will bring the water to life and give it a realistic, transparent quality. All right, so here's the part that I really feel is important for all of us, is maybe try to do something quickly. And what it does is it trains you not to think of water as water, but just water as another thing you're seeing, okay? Challenge yourself to look at water and study the values and colors you see. Try to paint the look and feel of the water and its transparent effects, alla prima, meaning, all right, and then I just grabbed this definition from Wikipedia. Alla prima is an Italian term that translates to at first attempt and refers to painting techniques where paint is applied wet on wet without letting earlier layers dry. This method is often used in oil painting and allows the artist to complete the work in a single session. It's a technique that requires a fast working method and can bring out a spontaneous, fresh, and immediate style in the artwork. The approach emphasizes the importance of edges, soft blended ones contrasted with sharp defined edges, and requires a bold and decisive handling of the paint to capture the subject's essence directly and expressively. So what you'll really learn from this is you really have to learn to just go, okay, what do I see? You know, what value, what color, what temperature, what's the edge quality, and just try to recreate it. So it really is an abstract way of thinking. All right. I guess I can go over this very quickly here, but this is just what I captured from the article here. The soul's veil, seeing beyond the surface. To truly capture the quality of a place or subject, artists must have a feeling about it beyond its physical appearance. If the artist feels nothing, so will the viewer. I think that is just a really good reminder. All right. This is, I thought, a really interesting little thing that she had done here. Balance considerations, rhythm considerations, and harmony considerations. So balance considerations, this is like, how does your design work, right? So you got the central axis, the proportion or the scale, the weight, you know, how is the painting weighted? Does it feel balanced or not? Dominance, is there a dominant area or area of focus? The golden mean, I don't go over that too much. We may cover that in the fall class. Symmetry and asymmetry, really important. Like, do you want it to feel more organic or more inorganic? Do you want balance, or, you know what I mean? Focal point, flatness and depth, and tension and relief. Rhythm considerations, visual pathways, movement and speed, direction, emphasis, and exclusion. Syncopation, I guess that's a music term there.
Yes,
I
it
think
does.
it means a little bit. Is syncopation mean rhythm? And
Yes.
all right, variety and interest, contrast, flow, and repetition. And then when we get to harmony, it's economy, meaning, you know, what's the least amount of brush strokes, the least amount of colors, the least amount of values that I can do to get my idea across. Integration, connectedness, transitions, synthesis, gradation, brushwork, personal aesthetics, and relationships. These are great things to kind of keep in mind when you're working on your water or your painting. Art is the reproduction of what the senses perceive in nature through the veil of the soul. Edgar Payne. That guy's got so many good quotes. A painter must be like the choir director. So this kind of refers back to something I talk about a lot in class, right? Who knows how to sense the melody as it intertwines among the sections while allowing the soloist to shine. It becomes increasingly evident that artistic tools are only the means to an end. That end is to let others into your inner poetic life, to share with them what we see beneath the surface. To cultivate inner vision, it is important to contemplate what fascinates and stirs us. Is what we are looking at or experiencing a metaphor for something deeper, something larger? Solitude, peace, security, love, interdependence, praise. What is the emotion and what is the inspired content? I'm working with I have been working with a group of artists, and we have where we have to check in every day. And one of the big things that one of the other artists is really challenging me as I start my paintings is to really say, what is this about? You know, not what is it, but what is it about? Like, what's the emotion? What's the feeling I want to get other people to feel by looking at my paintings? It's probably easier for him because he's doing a lot of figurative work and a lot of more metaphorical work, whereas I'm still doing semi-representational landscapes. But I think it's really interesting for us to think about that while we're painting or while we're starting. All right.
One of the people that I took painting from suggested choosing one word. You know, is it a hot day? Is it cold? Just one emotional word, and keep that in your mind while you're working on that painting. So that would help with that.
100%. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And I think that hot or cold or whatever is not even enough. It's more like, I want to talk about security. Okay, so what colors could I use to talk about security? So I might be shifting the
piece.
colors. I may be shifting the shapes. Like security to me is like domed shapes, like umbrellas, or hugs, or you know what I mean? Like what ways could I talk about that? So yeah, it's a very interesting tool. And if you guys, for those students who have had in the past, I have that handout where that's one of the first questions is kind of, what is this painting about? What is the subject? What is the feeling? What is the mood? And that's going to affect every other decision going forward. All right, this last section was at the end of the article, and I just really liked it. It's all about line, and just the use of line in painting. When we think of a line, we think of like a pen or a pencil, right? You just draw that line. But truthfully, line is wherever two things meet. It could be light and dark. It could be warm and cool colors. It could be just different colors. Wherever different variables meet, they create a line. A harder line, a crisper line, will lead the eye. A soft, blurred line will let the eye kind of deviate. It's super, super important. Okay. But what's really great is knowing that line has power, line has energy. So let's look at this real quick. Okay. So what is the main line in this picture? Probably right
diagonal.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that diagonal. So there's a bit of movement. Even though this water is very, very still, there's movement in this piece as far as how our eye moves through it. Right? So diagonals give us movement and a sense of energy. Horizontals, the uprights.
Verticals.
Oh, gosh, I don't know why I mix those two up. The verticals, thank you. Verticals create strength and kind of a groundedness. Horizontals, there I used it right, give us a sense of peace. So this painting, our photo, even though it doesn't really have a lot of horizontals, and even though it's still water, still has, you see how our eye creates this line along the water?
Yeah.
Line, line, line. And in here, it's less line because it's very broken up, right? Let's see if I can find one that's got good horizontals. Right? So here's all horizontals. Does this piece, just if we go back and forth between the two, does it make you feel much calmer, much more quiet? Even though, again, the water is very still.
Yeah.
That horizontal line is basically, just think laying down, right? It's the most relaxed position we have. Standing up takes movement and strength and bearing and balance, right? But there's nothing really big here that's upright. So you want to think about that a little bit when you're contemplating your painting of, I want to create a very calm, relaxing piece. Well, this one's all angles, all right. It's still calm. It's not crazy, but there is movement. Our eye moves in diagonals through this piece. This piece has diagonals, but they're very, very subtle. Right?
Mhm.
It has definitely more movement than this, but it's still very quiet, right? Does that make sense, you guys?
Yeah.
You're trying to get the emotional idea. Okay. So horizontal, sloping, and meandering lines are calming and bring repose. Vertical lines denote strength, grandeur, nobility, rigidity, and stability. Diagonal lines express movement and action or excitement. Radial lines can draw attention and emphasis to the focus of the painting. Go back to this one. So if this was our focus, right, this kind of an area, that's where we're trying to get to. Look at all these lines that kind of lead us to that. Right? If I were to draw on this, you would see these radial lines. Let's see if it'll let me. You guys see that? So you can use radial lines to convey interest, right? Right? If we put in some clouds, like if we wanted to have a cloud that really helped emphasize it. Right? And that would reflect into the water. So we could really play this up if we wanted to. Sometimes the radial lines, yes. Sometimes they're really strong, sometimes they're really weak. And it's not all paintings have radial lines, but it's something to be aware of. Jagged lines are disturbing or distressing, or can impart a sense of wariness or danger. Sweeping or spiraling lines can direct the speed at which the viewer's eye moves through the painting. Circular or curved lines can give a womb-like sense of protection and safety. I really like the feeling of domes and soft edges. So a lot of times in my paintings, I will lean towards, I've always loved oak trees. And it's, these aren't oaks, but I love that shape. To me, it just feels secure. It feels kind of like, again, like a hug. You guys see that? What I'm talking about there?
Yep.
It's like a hug within a hug within a hug. And that's just a personal thing. Like it's almost something I didn't even have words for in the beginning when I started teaching, or when I started, just noticing that this shape came into a lot of my paintings. This big dome. And I don't know if that's just the type of trees that grow around here. I spent so much of my time climbing oak trees and, sitting amongst their branches. I just find that. So I think we would all have shapes and designs and things that we're drawn towards. And you can really play those up and kind of figure out, what is the metaphor? What does that mean to you? And does it do what you want it to do in your painting, right? Here's that strong zigzag, right? This painting feels, even though it's kind of relaxing, it still feels more intense, right?
Yeah.
It's got that versus something like this, where it's just a slow sweep. You guys feel that difference?
Yeah.
Bam, bam, versus. So we're thinking about all of those things when we are, zigzag, a lot of movement in here. And then it gets to this quieter area. If I wanted this to be calmer, I would just get rid of some of these sharp little edges in here and just make it a slower sweep like we have here. This one's almost too boring. This was man-made, eventually it's going to fill in, but it's, been dug perfectly. So it's a little inorganic versus something like this, where it's the same shape, but it's got, more irregularity, feels more naturalistic.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions, you guys? That was a big lesson, but now we don't have to do a lesson next week. So anything, Hassan, are you there?
Yes.
Great. Did that all make sense to you? I know you had a couple questions on some of this previously.
Yeah, I mean, probably have a lot more question when I try to do that. But when you paint, do you paint? I don't think you paint like layer after layer, right? Or you
I'm
just keep that in mind, or how do
I'm
you?
experimenting with doing both. I'm experimenting with like doing the palette knife and making like those waves much more direct and much more textured. And then I'm also experimenting with doing more transparency. So I'll often have a painting like, okay, I want this done in 1 or 2 settings. And then another painting, I'm like, you're going to take me weeks because I got to let the layers dry. You know, I might only paint on it for 15 or 20 minutes a day, but then I have to let that dry. So just be aware if you're thinking like if Sharon or Nyla or anybody else was just like, you know what, I really want to do this transparency, I want to build up the painting. Don't just work on one painting because you're going to be sitting there watching it dry. You've got to work on multiple paintings. So those ones that I'm working on in layers, in fact, I just started 2 more of them. They're behind me here. I just know that I'll work on those for 15, 20 minutes a day and then set it aside and come back in 2 or 3 days again and work more into it. So it's a lot of patience. So if layers and glazing is what you want to play with, probably do something else as well. Don't just, you know, otherwise it's no fun watching paint dry, right?
Probably a good plan for someone with ADHD too.
Yes, and or people that are impatient, because I have definitely glazed into paintings before they're set, and that's very, very sad. When you all of a sudden just wipe your whole underpainting away or make it a big blurry foggy mess.
And the best way to tell if it's completely dry is what?
I will usually try to get my fingernail into it and rub it around a little bit, or I'll take just work in a little area that maybe is less important. You can even take if you're doing oils, just a dab of your Gamsol, your paint thinner on a brush, just a little bit, and just give it a little scrub in an area, again, that's not important, you know, in a shadow area or, you know, area of less detail, and just give it a little, rubbing a paper towel across it, a dry paper towel can also work. But the problem is with glazing is oftentimes we'll add a medium. So if you run a dry paper towel across it, it's not always going to activate as much as if you added just a touch of paint thinner to it. Who was it? Linda, I think it was you that asked earlier, Linda Morgan O'Connor, talked about putting a thin layer of transparent paint in between it. I will often put on a little bit of a medium like Galkid or Liquin or whatever it is, and I will just wipe that on. And if the painting doesn't move, that's great. Let that sit for about 5 minutes, maybe even a minute, just a couple minutes. And then I will take my paper towel and very lightly wipe that away. And that kind of locks in that other layer, and it creates kind of a nice surface for the next layer. And it creates a little bit of separation. So if I do put in a glazing color and I really don't like it, I've got that layer that I can just remove really quickly. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Great. Let's go ahead and take our first break here. And then we're going to come back, look at your guys' work, and then we'll come back into a quick demo of glazing. I hope it works with the painting I started before class, right before class. So that's way shorter than I would normally let my acrylics dry. And then I will probably, due to time, just kind of talk about what I want to do to the painting from previous, and then work on it next week, because we're going to have a lot more time because we won't have critique or lessons. How does that sound, everybody?
Good.
All
Sounds
right.
good. Yeah.
See you guys at 11 o'clock, so 7 minutes.